Hello, how are you? Good evening. My name is Hillary Mahan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Manhattan Beach Education Foundation. And our foundation was founded on the principle of supporting students in their academic journey through the Manhattan Beach education system in the Unified School District. The opportunities that we support range from library resource specialists at the elementary level to STEM and music programs at the secondary level. And in addition to that, MBEF supports students as they look beyond graduation and on to their next step of their journey. Donations to MBEF actually fund the College and Career Center and for our students at MiraCosta. Tonight, we have partnered with the CCC to bring our families more information regarding the current college admissions process. The landscape has drastically changed for our students today. It seems there are more unknowns than there are knowns. And while college admissions testing was once a pivotal part of the prospective student's application, many schools have shifted to test optional or even test blind. We are here tonight to find out what that means for our students today and have invited a panel of experts here to help us. Throughout the discussion, our panelists will be answering questions that we think are pertinent to the information you seek. However, we have allowed time at the end of the presentation for questions to be addressed that were submitted via the Google platform or the webinar Q&A. Please be patient as we will try to address all questions at the end. There are also a few resources I want to point out to you that help complement the discussion tonight. First and foremost, MBEF coordinates the effort to produce an updated MiraCosta school profile each year. This profile is a resource for college admissions departments to understand the rigor and breadth of MiraCosta's program. You can find the profile for 2020-21 on the MiraCosta website under About Us. The Compass Guide is also a very valuable resource. This is the guide to college admissions testing that was emailed to you previously in the link. This resource helps you understand exactly what college testing is about and what colleges expect each year. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the phenomenal team at the CCC who help to ensure our students are supporting and fulfilling their aspirations.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Karen Ramirez. I'm one of the College and Career Counselors at MiraCosta. We also have Miss Ruthie Robles, who you'll hear from in a little bit. But before we get started tonight, I just kind of wanted to give everybody an idea of the services that we offer in the College and Career Center for those of you that maybe haven't used our resources yet. So some of the services that we offer are one-on-one college and career counseling meetings with both students and their parents. We help with the college essay as well as personal statement review for seniors. We do college applications reviews, a lot of webinars for college application support. In addition to students applying to four-year colleges, we also provide community college exploration, application support, as well as for students looking into maybe a trade school, we offer that too. We also offer Naviance, which is our college and career search database training and assistance. We actually go through the students' classes and provide support on how to use Naviance accurately. And then we also offer resources like tonight with the SAT and the ACT and different test prep. So even though we're not in the office currently, we are having office hours 5 days a week. You can find our office hours schedule on our website. If you just go to the MiraCosta website, to the college tab, in the drop down, any sort of important news or information will be under that CCC weekly updates page. So you'll find our office hours there and then any other important webinars or programs we're offering currently. And we look forward to working with you. We just want to thank you for coming tonight. And also here on the screen, you will see our contact information. So if you have any questions for us about anything, we're happy to chat with you. So thanks again.
Thank you, Karen. I'd like to introduce a few of our panelists here this evening. First, Adam Ingersoll, you might recognize as a past panelist and presenter for MBEF for our schools and families. Adam is a founder of the Compass Education Group, and he has been a tremendous resource for our families over the years. He began his career in test prep in 1993 at USC, where he was a student athlete and worked in the admissions office. And over the past 2 decades, he's guided thousands of families through successful experiences with standardized tests. He has shared his expertise with MiraCosta students and families for the past 8 years, providing current information to help guide the process. Also here with us this evening, we have Fiona Reese of the University of California at Los Angeles. Fiona has served in the college admissions profession for over 20 years and is currently the Deputy Director of Admission at UCLA. Her responsibilities include managing the transfer evaluation process and undergraduate international admission. Prior to moving to California and UCLA in 2012, she worked at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. Welcome, Fiona. Also joining us, we have Lisa Rohn. She's from the University of Southern California. She's the Assistant Dean of Admission here at USC and is the Senior Manager responsible for undergraduate recruitment strategy. In the profession for over 25 years, her professional experience includes time at the University of the Pacific, University of California at Santa Cruz, as well as, of course, USC. Ruthie, would you like to introduce our next panelist? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ruthie Robles. I'm one of the MiraCosta College and Career Counselors. I'm here to introduce Lori Calloway. She's an Assistant Director with the University of Colorado at Boulder, serving as the university's Territory Manager for first-year recruitment in Southern California while working regionally in the area. Previously, she worked with St. Louis University as a regional program coordinator and with the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University as a regional recruiter. She is a member of and volunteers with the Regional Counselors of California and a member of WACAC. I'm also here to introduce Stephen Koo. He is Associate Director at Boston College, Office of Undergraduate Admission. He's originally from Somers, New York, now in his 20th year at Boston College. Prior to joining the admissions office, he spent his first 6 years working in the compliance office of the Boston College Athletics Department, and then moved over to admissions in 2007. Working in higher education these past 2 decades has been a wonderful experience for Stephen. He's been able to meet thousands of high school students across the country and engage in really great conversations about the college experience and the application process. Admissions territories don't change very often for Boston College, so we've been very fortunate enough to have Stephen review all of the applications from the greater Los Angeles area for over the past 14 admission cycles.
Wonderful, thank you. So now we'd love to open this panel discussion up by starting with Adam representing Compass. And we'd love to hear, Adam, from you in terms of what sort of general trends you're seeing in the college admissions process across the country, particularly related to the college admissions testing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's good to be here. The college admission testing landscape has completely radically changed in the last 12 months. And normally you attend an annual talk at school where I talk for an hour about just how to do testing. Tonight I'm going to talk about why you may not have to, or why you might at least want to give it less attention than you would have a year ago. And then I will get out of the way for these 4 admissions experts who can share with you everything that they have to offer. Hillary, I have a couple slides. I may share my screen. Okay, I'm going to move quickly, and I will share the PowerPoint with the MBEF to pass on to all of you here later. In a typical year, the agenda of what students and families need to cope with testing was static. It didn't change too much year to year. This year, the first question you should ask is, does it make sense for you to just skip testing altogether? And it might. I'll give you some context in a moment, but I want to honor that first and foremost as a legitimate, valid choice. If testing is not something that your values suggest that you want to attach time and energy to, or that you don't believe it will be a meaningful addition to what you present to colleges in your application, especially for students in California, that is increasingly a choice that is not particularly compromised necessarily, and something you might want to at least consider. If you go on and deal with testing, there's a number of just specific kind of nitty-gritty topics that normally I would spend time on. You see those here, but for the sake of discussion tonight, the written resource that's been sent to you goes through these in painstaking detail, and we have recorded webinars where you can learn about all of that. So I want to just take my time and set the table by instead talking about this last question of, should you take the test? And when you do, how do you think about whether to report scores and where? And what do you make of the all of these new policies that are coming your way from colleges? So let me give you some perspective on that first. Back in February 2020, a group of about 400 plus colleges that we have tracked closely for decades, tracking their testing policies and testing profiles. Back then, those 400 plus colleges, which by the way, include those that are moderately to highly selective, that have to deny a greater portion of their applicants than they admit, and also just those that are widely recognized nationally. It certainly includes the 4 that are represented here tonight. I don't mean to suggest the other 2,000 are not worthy of your consideration, but these are the ones that drive headlines. 1 year ago, 2/3 of those institutions required the SAT or ACT for your application to be considered. More than 1/3, though, were already test optional, which means you don't even have to submit an SAT or ACT to be considered. So I want to be clear that test optional is not this brand new thing. Many colleges have a lot of experience admitting students without scores. It is not a radical change only because of a public health crisis. There are very legitimate and important philosophical underpinnings to it that are important to know about when you're evaluating these policies. Here's where we are now a year later. And actually, here's where we were by roughly July of last year. Within that pool of colleges, a whopping 12 remained with a testing requirement. The entire world went test optional if they weren't already. Within the group of those that were test optional, we've been keeping tabs on which ones already were or made it a permanent policy, and which ones were doing a trial of 1 year or maybe committing to multi-year. And we're continuing to follow what those colleges are doing for the 11th graders. But again, to be very clear, for the current 12th graders, very, very few selective colleges especially required tests of them. So let me break this down just a little bit here quickly. It's very simple for me to just simply name the schools within our pool of 400 plus that still require tests. It's the entire state university system of Florida. These things have political underpinnings, as you might imagine. A few of the service academies, a few schools in Texas, and that is really it. So I can't overstate just this truth that your choices of where you'll receive full consideration are not constrained by whether you are able to have a test score, whether you are willing to possibly put your health and others' health at risk to get a score, whether you want to deal with these tests that are stressful and time consuming and maybe say very little about you that's important and that isn't already clear in the other pieces of your application. So tiny, tiny list of those that held on to a rigid requirement. Many colleges went all the way beyond test optional and adopted what we call a test-free policy. This is a growing movement. It is significant. There are dozens of colleges across the country, public, private, small, large, that have adopted a test-free movement, which means you can put months into your testing and come up with these great scores, and you would have wasted your time at these schools because they are not going to see them. I want to say too that when you add up the campuses that these institutions include, it's about 70 colleges, which is a lot. It's only about 2% of all four-year colleges nationally, but it's a very significant number. And I just think this is remarkable. Can you imagine if you had told a West Coast kid a year ago that you can apply to any of these schools you see on screen here on the West Coast? Let's say you want to stay on the West Coast. You're restricting yourself to the West Coast. Look at all of these colleges, including the 23 Cal States and all the UCs that will, not only do you not have to send them a score, in fact, you don't have to worry about competing with students who had a score and maybe had just more resources than you did. So this is a wonderful thing. Now the West Coast is leading the way here. And it's something that all California students should really know and appreciate. Most of, if not all of these schools, if not mistaken, are in some trial phase with the test-free policy. It's not assured to remain a permanent policy at all of these places. But I'm personally, my speculation is that the colleges that are test optional, very few of them are going to go back anytime soon, if at all, to requiring tests. I think the effects of the pandemic are lingering long enough that even if you're only test optional because of testing accessibility being limited, you still are probably going to stay test optional for at least another year. And I think the policy in California, the public schools, has permanently changed. So that perspective, please keep that in mind. The testing policies for the current 11th graders, many colleges, and there's new announcements weekly, are saying what their policy will be. But there are many that have not yet, and we are keeping an eye on them. Just to give you some visuals, these would all be colleges that went to a one-year test optional policy for the 12th graders, have not yet stipulated what they are doing for the current 11th graders. So this is something to keep an eye on if you're an 11th grader, which colleges extend the test optional policy, how do they explain it? I think substantially all of them will, but that is something to keep tabs on here as we go. I want to speak for a minute on this topic. I and my team get these questions for the last year, especially, just a lot of distrust of the test optional option. And that question in italics, we get some version of that just constantly. And I want to really implore parents to assure your kids that test optional means just what it says. Almost every stipulation of the policy includes the phrase "not disadvantaged," and that should be trusted. I get into these semantic debates about whether not disadvantaged is not quite the same thing as foregoing a potential advantage that testing could have provided. Some people, say, well, that's a distinction without a difference. Maybe there's a difference some places, but it's just, if you should not go into the college process so distrusting of the human beings on the other side of the process, that you are cynical and jaded in how you would read these statements. Here are 3 statements from colleges about tests optional. I want it to be clear that I chose 3. The top one happens to be my uncle, used to be at USC, so I can really vouch for what he's saying. But here's the point. These were 3, I had hundreds to choose from. Vast majority of colleges, including all the selective colleges, really, really tried to assure students that they should not be overthinking testing during a pandemic, and that the test optional choice was a legitimate choice. There are some, and I want to talk for the next minute about the exceptions and the misinformation that is overstated or stated wrongly, frankly, by a lot of tutoring companies and others with an agenda. That yes, there are some colleges, you can find examples of less assuring language, where the language does seem to hint at a preference for scores. And it's not hard to read this. Georgetown is pretty notorious in our world for having quite a bit of concern for testing over the years. What I cannot emphasize enough is that these institutions are in a small minority. Vast majority of the college admissions world has tried hard to be clear that test optional is legit. So, but it is thoughtful. It is correct for students, as your college list shortens and as you are thinking about how much attention, if any, to give to your own testing, you would evaluate what is the exact language of the colleges that I'm applying to. What historically has appeared to be their concern for testing. This is information too that the counselors can help you with. Some data within the current 12th graders, what happened? Testing volume nationally was down nearly 25% year over year from the class before them to the current 12th graders. There were extreme variations. Here's California ACT access compared to Florida. So looking at site availability over the current school year projected through July, 84% decline in site availability to take the ACT in California. Florida, 17%, negligible. Okay, so the point is that even if schools that recruit heavily from the West Coast, which let me tell you is pretty much all of them, even if their only interest in offering test optional was to be responsive to this reality, the public health concern, even if they were less important to them was all the other wonderful reasons to be test optional, there was no humane option really other than to not insist that students in a state like California go and take the tests. So my point to students and parents is colleges know this. This was part and parcel of the policy changes. The second bullet point here, historically, schools that were both test optional and selective, they receive scores anyway from usually about 60 to 80% of their applicants. That is lower for the class of 2021, but to varying degrees, depending on the school and where a lot of their students come from. A lot of applications, I think millions or well, if not mistaken, go through the Common App platform. A year ago, 77% of applications through the Common App at that moment in time had included test scores, even though a lot of those applications were to schools that were test optional. As of February 15th of this year, the current 12th graders had included test scores with 44% of the apps sent through the Common Application. So a couple thoughts here. That's a significant decline. That reflects lack of access to testing. It reflects acceptance of the philosophical change by colleges, really diminishing the relevance and importance of testing. Keep in mind that over that period, many more colleges were test optional than were the prior year. So students had more opportunity to be test optional. So I see this statistic discussed both ways. Some of us expect the floor to fall out a lot further of testing. 44% is still quite a few, applications that are including scores. And importantly, what we have seen ourselves, and we've seen plenty of research now backing this up, is the applications that do tend to include test scores let me be clear, tend to be from students who are not for the first generation of their family to go to college, who are not underrepresented minority applicants, not Californians. Testing was largely wiped out, and not lower scores. So some of that makes sense if you know anything about college admissions and the inequities in the world. What also makes sense is that students the last year, the 12th graders, have been making these tactical decisions in their applications that are just logical. So if you are a student from an area and from a background with lots of support and resources, and testing continued to stay propped up for you and available to you, you are more likely to take it. If you expected to get strong scores that would potentially help you, you were more motivated to take the tests. You had a strong score, you were more likely to submit it when given the choice. So none of that should be terribly surprising, but it also, it really reminds us why before COVID, testing was hugely problematic in the overweighted role it played, or that at least it felt like it played in the college admissions context. So that veil has finally been lifted, and all the things about these tests that just are not helpful enough relative to whatever marginal value they provide to the professionals on this call and their decisions, that it's a good thing that so much of the concern for them has been peeled back. Also, we are seeing that test scores are more likely included in applications to more selective colleges, naturally, larger colleges, and also students applying for STEM programs. And that's probably not terribly surprising. I already mentioned that slide. Last thing I want to talk about quickly is you are going to see as data comes out from colleges about their admitted students. And we've been seeing lots of reports about the early decision pools and what happened to those students. Some stats. Here are 5 colleges that when they reported on their ED pools of applicants, they broke out admission rate by students who had scores and those who did not. There are not very many colleges that did this. I wish that more would, but I understand why some do not, because tutoring companies are going to take them and run with them in ways that just further misinformation. You could look at this simple chart and draw the erroneous simplified conclusion that only Swarthmore is failing to confer a lot of advantage on students with test scores. Swarthmore, percent admitted with and without scores, looks pretty level. The others looks like there's a difference. Let me discuss this. First, Swarthmore brought this to our attention on a forum last month, and it assured us that this was a commitment that they had made, that they had done quite intentionally. Wonderful. Not all colleges would be able to do that quite as intentionally or able to talk about it as openly as Swarthmore did, but I believe many were thinking the same thing. When you evaluate assertions of testing providing an advantage to students, it's really important to not be fooled by, some simplified stats. Swarthmore, if you look at these figures, you see a difference of only 2 percentage points for students admit rate who had a test score. That, if in a simplistic calculation, implies a 9% greater likelihood of being admitted with scores. Emory, admit rate was 29% of students who submitted scores, 16% those who did not. So a difference, raw, just simplified difference, 13 percentage points. That could be said to be 83% more likely to be admitted if you had scores. That is false and dumbed down and useless, because there's lots of things going on here, but most fundamentally, it's implying causation where really you just have correlation. The fact is that students who score higher or more likely to submit scores, students who score higher or more likely to be wealthy, have a lot of resources, crazy efforts were made to take the test in the first place. Also, students who score high do tend to have stronger transcripts, partly because the tests do measure things that are academic to some degree, but for lots of other reasons as well. Finally, the fact that students who score high tend to also have stronger transcripts is partly why many colleges have said, we don't really need the testing, because in so many cases for so many applicants, it simply weakly confirms what the transcript already told us. So for all these reasons, consider the agenda of the source if you see colleges' stats manipulated to kind of try to inflame your anxiety about testing. Can a score potentially help you? Sure. You know, a place that has required scores for decades and now doesn't, presumably had a reason for requiring all along. But in my career, I constantly see the mistake that families make is they overthink the relevance of testing relative to the other pieces of the application. And that then drives students' behavior to be imbalanced, where just too much of their time and concern is given to tests, to the detriment of other things they could be doing in their lives that are more meaningful. We are writing about this stuff all the time. We can find more of that on our website, but I'm at my time. I will stop my screen share and kick things back to the moderators, and I look forward to hearing from the admissions officers.
Thank you, Adam. That was very thorough. And as usual, the data is always helpful to really take a look at what exactly is happening. And in this particular year, it's especially important. So we would like to open it up to our panelists now, who are admissions officers, and start with the question of what is the current admissions policy at your particular university, and if you see that being impacted anyway. Adam has suggested that in fact, he doesn't necessarily see colleges and universities shifting away from any decisions that they've made in the pandemic crisis, but do you anticipate that for your own location as well? So why don't we start with Fiona from UCLA?
Adam's actually kindly covered this for me already, so thank you, Adam. The University of California has said that we will be test blind through at least entry in fall 2025, and by then we will have determined whether we will have created our own test or whether we will continue to be test blind. So that is across the entire system.
Great. And how about Lisa at USC? What is your current stance, and do you see that shifting in any way?
Yeah, so we are test optional for all of the reasons that have been discussed. Students didn't have the ability to take the test in so many places this year, so we absolutely went test optional. And we have also announced that we will remain test optional for the next 2 classes as well, so that we can further examine the impacts and understand really how tests are being used and if that is necessary to include in our process. So test optional for at least 2 more years.
Great, thank you. And Stephen at Boston College.
So at Boston College, we were test optional this cycle, and we will be test optional next year. So anyone who's a junior, we will be test optional. After that, we don't know. My guess is that the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management and our Director of Admissions, they are thinking about different things, but we haven't heard anything in terms of what will happen after next year.
Great. And Lori?
So we're currently test optional this year, which is something that we fully support on the admission side. We've taken the test score out of merit scholarship consideration, and we've been communicating very heavily that we believe that students should be prioritizing their health, their safety, their well-being, and also their sanity in this pursuit. So this is something that we've worked really hard on this year to augment our process, but being test optional as a holistic review school is not a radical change. We're moving a factor of all the factors that we consider. The one caveat to this is that we are a public university and our testing policy, our admission requirements are set by the state legislature, which have to also be ratified be signed by the governor. And then that bill would also have to be then passed by the State Board of Regents. So there's currently a bill in the House, very nascent in the process, which would allow us to be test optional going forward. That would have to pass through, get signed, and also get passed again at the Regents level. The system chancellor has come out strongly in favor of it. Our system president, our chancellor has come out strongly in favor of it. And fundamentally, we just believe the research that shows it's not necessary to our process.
Interesting. Fiona, is that the same with UCLA in terms of any progress or shifts that you make after this initial 2 years?
We are in this policy through 2025. So
Okay.
it's actually for another 4 cycles. And I did see that there was a question that came in. Just to clarify, when I say test blind, that means that you can you can sit for a test, but we will not look at it. So that's the University of California policy.
And how does that differ then for those of you who your schools are test optional? That does not mean you're test blind. So I know Lori's indicated that they're really looking at the whole child and the social emotional wellness of the student. Perhaps you all can jump in terms of that optional aspect and how you think that might impact admissions at your schools.
Yeah, the test score is one component of many that we consider as we look at students' applications. And so if a student chooses to submit a test score, we will review it and along with the rest of their materials. If they choose to not submit a test score, we're not looking for that. It's not missing. It's not something that's going to be detrimental to the student in the review process. So really it's just, if the score is there, what is it adding? And it's the same thing if an activity is listed, what is that adding? Or what the letter of recommendation that we have, what is that adding? So it's just one piece.
I'll add to that. You know, Lori used the H word, holistic. And that certainly is what this process for us is about. And I think for so many schools out there, that's what it's about. And when we talk about testing, just like Lisa said, it's one piece of your application. And for us and lots of schools, the transcript, 4 years of consistent hard work, that's the backbone of how we go through an application. And then you look at kind of objective and subjective pieces of an application to try and figure out what is the best fit for this university that I work for. We try to figure out all those different types of things. So test optional for us, and I'll admit, if a student says they are not submitting testing, but then they put it in their Common App, you have to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle. And that's not the easiest thing to do, but this year we did it. This is our very first year ever being test optional. And it's funny when students say they'll do one thing and they do something else. And that for us in our office, we had discussions about it. And I'm like, ignore it. You got to ignore it because they said they're going test optional. And so I think the test optional piece, there's distrust out there. And Adam, you're right. You've heard it. We've all heard it. We are saying there is no disadvantage to not submitting testing. What happens for us in 2 more years, I don't know, but we continue to kind of gauge what's happening out there.
Thank you. So with the transcript that you mentioned, Stephen, as really being the backbone of a student's application, how does the way in which one school, I know we get this question quite a bit, and I'm sure our College and Career Center does too, how does an admissions office look at the transcripts of students from all these different facilities, all these different educational institutions in terms of how they might rank students or offer more APs or offer a more rigorous platform? What do you use to help determine and scale the actual high schools that these students are coming from?
It's definitely a philosophical discussion in our office a lot, and I'm sure at lots of offices across the country. We always say we can't penalize a student for what their school does not offer. So if someone goes, so I'll just use Los Angeles, and I forget, 24 APs, 13 honors, something like that at MiraCosta. You guys offer a lot of great opportunities for students, and we try to figure out, with what's available to them, what do they take? And I think it's always trying to balance rigor versus performance. But then if I go to another part of LA, if I go away from Manhattan Beach and if I go to Watts, if I go to places that don't offer as many great opportunities, I am now trying to figure out, okay, this student had this available to them. What did they take advantage of? So if they took advantage of everything they possibly could, I'm still trying to take that student if they've done well. So yeah, it's like I said, 14 years, I think that has helped me kind of understand LA a lot more. So I think it's tough to try and say, oh, I'm going to compare schools, but I am comparing students at each school and then trying to figure out, okay, what have they done within the context of their environment, right? So at MiraCosta, and then at another high school, same type of thing. And we're trying to figure out what have they done? What could they have done? And I think that kind of balancing act is something that makes this process much more art than science.
So if I can add to that too, I've long joked that if when you do these panels, you were given a bingo card, the free square in the middle would either be context or it depends. And if you're really lucky, we'll use them both in the same sentence. So to answer the question, it depends because it's based on the context of your school. That just as Stephen was talking about, like every school has different challenges and every opportunities. There are some schools where they don't philosophically want to teach to a test, so they're not going to offer any APs. There are some philosophically that will give out lots of A's. There's one school in New York that every year just confounds me because 90% of their students have a GPA that is above a 90 or above. So I'm hearing 93 and I'm like, oh, that's an AA minus. That's a pretty strong student. Yeah, no, you're actually in the bottom 10% of your class. So we could just as easily give grades that are A's, B's, and C's as we could give grades that are rhinoceros, giraffe, elephants, etc. We need the context of your school. And just as Stephen was saying, how have you done within that context? And that's what our jobs are. That's what many of us have spent the last many months is reading your applications, but really placing how you've done academically, which is always the backbone, within the context of that particular and your particular school.
Lisa or Lori, do you have anything to add to that particular comment?
Yeah, it's so funny when Stephen was speaking, I immediately went to where Fiona said, I'm like, it's so cliche, but what about context, right? And you get to that because that's what's so important. Earlier, you mentioned the school profile, and that is so helpful and so important for us to know to get to, the starting place of context and what that's going to be and what opportunities a student had so we can determine the extent to which they've taken advantage of that. Stephen said it's more of an art than a science, but there's a lot of science that allows us to get to the art, right? So we think about the research. We look, many institutions, we definitely, look at the history of success of students who have come to the institution to understand that, did we make the right choice? Are they here? Were they prepped? Are they being successful at our institution? So that reinforces the kinds of decisions that we can continue to make based on what we've evaluated and what we've gathered in our review process.
Yeah, I just also wanted to give a little, not to be too cheesy, but context about the context. So Fiona mentioned, there's the school and, 90% have over 90, And how does that translate to MiraCosta with all these students having 4.0s and having really great transcripts? Part of the context, especially with what we do with all of our schools, you mentioned that, I work at your school, Steven's been seeing 14 cycles, is we understand how what we're seeing on a transcript translates to what you will do on our campus over time. We have worked with your school long enough. We know what the courses are. We know the rigor. We know how you're prepared. So when we're looking into these applications, and a lot of schools do read applications like this, we are not just skimming the cream off the top and picking the top certain numbers of GPAs and making it this randomized process by which you either get picked as the top or not. That would make a really stagnant, boring group of classes on campus. We are reading your applications to get a sense of, would you thrive in our classes? Would you like how we teach? Would you be taking advantage of our programs? And we know how to read applications to get that sense. And it takes all kinds of students to meet those metrics. So it's not just this rat race.
Very, very compelling information. I think that, that many of our families have specific questions about, in general, how a university or college looks at an application, but just to hear that the context is key. That knowing that a student that comes from MiraCosta, and thank you, Lisa, for mentioning the testing profile or the school profile again, because certainly that was something that we recognized at our school that we needed to put together in order to really, truly demonstrate what the expectations were of our students. And I think that has helped overall. Are you considering at your universities any other college readiness testing? Maybe for example, in California with the Smarter Balance test, there is talk of making that statewide test that happens in 11th grade, the actual test that a college or university would evaluate. Is that something that is potentially on the horizon that we've heard about?
Well, I can take that one since you can thank the UCs for that rumor. Smarter Balance has been tossed around as one of these options once we get to 2025 of, is there something else that we think would be useful for exactly the reasons that we've been discussing? But we also understand that all of the difficulties and the reasons that led us to go to test blind are likely to follow if we just substitute a different test. So there was an initial report that came out, it's COVID time, so days, could have been last week, could have been a couple months ago. I'm sure Adam probably knows off the top of his head, where they basically said, we're considering it, but there is no decision and we've got a couple years until we get there. So for the UCs, kind of everything's on the table for when we get to 2025. But I also wouldn't suddenly start worrying about, if you're a sophomore and you're going to be applying in 2 years, that suddenly next year Smarter Balance is going to rapidly or massively impact your application, because it won't. We will not be using anything until at least 2025.
If I may, there's no perfect test that addresses all of these concerns about inequity and so on. There's only theoretically less worse tests, but all of the energy, anxiety around one set of tests or one factor in the process, if removed or replaced, that energy, anxiety will flow elsewhere. So it's good to try to change the variables to, make the inequities less worse, but policy alone, won't ever fix what ails us with inequities in our higher education system. It's practice, which I think is what a lot of folks here are talking about. The one thing I want to say, it's interesting, that's looking at all of the questions that are coming in, is students and parents always tended to overestimate the relevance of testing back when it was required. So it should not surprise any of us that we're still overthinking the relevance of it now that it's gone or optional. But I just, again, maybe if I'm willing to say this, it will really, really sink in. But testing at best just kind of was this, it checks a box, it gives a little bit of context to grades we probably kind of already understood anyway. And it just was this it was a mountain in students and parents' eyes when it was always closer to a molehill. And if you start by accepting that truth, then I think you're in a much better place to think about the options available to you now, test free and test optional, and what actually makes sense. At the same time, I am grateful when colleges will admit that, yes, of course, testing could still possibly help you marginally. You know, maybe if it helps explain something else. We are seeing a lot of the energy from the SAT, ACT now flow to APs. You know, that's a whole separate conversation. But again, so much of the nuance is lost, I think, in the way we think about the testing, and that's just always been true and still is.
Well, that is the perfect segue, Adam, actually, because my next question was, will AP courses and exam scores on APs play a bigger role now? You know, and of course, like you said, no test is perfect. So what kind of impact could that potentially have on each of your universities?
At least for Colorado, we are very much pulling back from what we're looking for in scores. We don't accept SAT 2 tests. We're not looking for the writing. AP scores play zero role in how we read, because students can even just take the test without necessarily sitting for the class. We have some former whiz kids in our office who made that point. And what we're really looking for is the student to submit the score if they think it advantages them. It doesn't make a difference in our process if one doesn't come in with a score, because we have an entire process for how to review a student who submits without a score. And what we're really looking for, like has been mentioned here, is the 4-year performance in the high school. That's going to help us understand what you're most likely to do given the next largest educational opportunity you're going to take on.
Yeah, I think the one of the opportunities that we have going test optional is to take this time for students to choose to submit an SAT or ACT, and if so, we'll consider it, and if not, we won't. And then because we've announced for 2 more years, to take the time to see the impact. At this point, we're not trying to find another test to put in its place. We're not looking at other assessments that are going to become of more importance. We want to see what the optional nature of submitting and not submitting these 2 tests, these 2 more traditional tests that have been around for so long, what impact that has. So we're not thinking about, oh golly, we don't have the SAT, ACT, but how did that AP go? Or how did, you know, some other assessment go? That's not the thought that we have right now.
Go ahead.
I would say that we are kind of doing the same thing we've always done in terms of AP exams. If you provide them, we'll take a look at them. Could they get some weight? They could, but I think more importantly would be that full year performance within the class. There are people that do wonderfully kind of as you kind of go through a class, and then something happens with the cumulative test, and we get that. Not every student at Boston College is a great test taker. So I think, would we put more weight upon anything? Yeah, we're putting more weight upon kind of each piece again. And again, I would say certainly the transcript. I will also admit it's been fun to read test optional this year. Kind of like Lisa said, are we going to get a different population at our school? I don't know, maybe. There are some students where I say to myself, yeah, coming from a particular high school, I don't think I would have said yes last year. And it's nice to say yes. So I think kind of when you play up and put more weight upon other aspects of an application when you don't have the test, that is fun for someone who works in admissions. You're not a slave to kind of I gotta see something here. I have to see this particular number. And then you get to an application that has no testing. And I'm like, yes, this is great. Let me just kind of, not footloose and fancy free, but it's exciting to kind of go through an application when you're kind of less hamstrung maybe.
I was going to say, I agree with all of my colleagues, but to also sort of point out that we spent a fair bit of time talking about SAT and ACTs and some of the inequalities that can go with that, just like with high schools. And taking APs is absolutely no different, both as far as the opportunities of your school offering them or not, the cost of being able to afford to take APs is not something that everybody has the luxury to be able to afford. And at least last year and this year too, the fact that the APs are online, you need to have stable internet. You need to be able to have a quiet place to be able to sit and study. And that is not something that every student is unfortunately going to have the opportunity to do. So for all of those reasons, we're very aware of that, and that's part of our process too.
I can share that demand for AP tutoring went up significantly last spring because of test optional and because of the change in the format of the tests. Interest in AP tutoring went up again last month when subject tests were once and for all canceled. So there's a belief on students' part that AP performance is now more important than ever. That's logical in that APs were always mainly a part of the transcript, right? Not that many colleges I'm aware of actually have ever cared about the scores. They care about, did you take the class and what was your grade in it? So from that standpoint, it makes some sense for that energy to flow to APs. And I hope colleges will continue to expand on and clarify their thoughts about it. But again, like this should not change the world for anyone. There was already tons and tons of anxiety and push around APs and kids taking tons of them. We are seeing some trends that I think we should watch carefully, which is we are hearing that more students are trying to take more APs earlier, so there's more time for them to show up on a transcript when colleges will see it. So not save as many for 12th grade. The implications about that are of concern are obvious. So I want to acknowledge the question from the audience, that those are realities that we are seeing, but changing in testing policy does not mean that a student who previously could handle 2 APs should now attempt 5. These should not be game changers in actual decisions that students are making. Would more concern to try to do your absolute best in your APs make sense? Yes. I think a general truth I have heard is that if the absence of test scores, the single most important thing that that the energy goes to would be the transcript. I can tell you that the efforts made to improve performance in APs are wildly more wholesome and meaningful than trying to get faster at ACT science section to pump up that score. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix in the conversation around AP.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Adam. And you all probably know that at MiraCosta, there is a limit to the number of APs that a student can take each year, and that is maxed out at 4. And it is for that reason, that the social emotional wellness of the student. And Fiona, I also appreciate you bringing up the inequities in the testing environment. And certainly that's a question I think that we'll continue to see and here that needs to be addressed, most definitely. So it's an interesting climate, and I think before we open it up to our general questions, I wanted to see if each of you have any words of advice other than you've already provided, which seems pretty clear to me, but I'd love to hear if you have any last comments. And then of course, Ruthie and Karen with their expertise will, if you have any questions as well, and then leading the Q&A too. So first, if anyone has anything to share in sort of your rite of passage for students and prospective college students, please do.
I would just, actually, Lisa, go for it first.
Well, I don't have any good advice, so that's why I'm going first. Because so the folks that follow will say something like amazing. As I'm sitting, I'm listening to my colleagues all speak. These are the questions that we've been getting. This is hard. It's a big transition. It's a change. There's lots of discomfort about the testing piece in the admission going process, let alone how challenging the college going process is. My piece of advice for folks who are on this webinar right now would be to go back and listen to this webinar again, because there's been so much valuable information, and the stuff that Adam presented, his slides, all of that context is so important and so true and so real. And it's exactly what no one believes. And you don't really listen to it because you're thinking of the question to ask to contradict it. And it's like, no, sit down, sit back, and really listen and take in what has been said. So that's my piece of advice.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same page. I was recently in a presentation where 2 students who had applied to colleges this year were asked what their thoughts about colleges saying they were test optional really were. And the thing that I heard that really concerned me is they thought that colleges generally meant it, but that they should go and fact check on sources like Reddit, which is fine, but they're speaking to students who had been admitted to colleges. So they have a vested emotional interest in supporting the process that got them into the places they're proud of being. And they were speaking to people who are financially incentivized specifically to push the need for a test score, specifically people who focus just specifically on helping people improve their scores. And those are voices in this community, yes, but the colleges are also voices in this community, and we are not in the business of lying to students. I know that this seems complicated because it's holistic, and when we think of merit, it thinks of a rank status and how do we just stack up merit. But holistic means we're trying to build a good group of people from the people we have in. There's an element of looking at that pool every single year. And when we say we can do that without a test score, and then we tell you how we will, and if we'll take test scores, what we will, and if we're not, what we mean that. And this is not in a wink and a nod, and this is not like a secret hurdle for you to then go the extra mile sending us the score having gotten the secret message. No, we mean this. We want you to prioritize your health, your well-being, your safety, what you believe is right and just, if you don't believe in test scores for your application, and to use this test optional landscape as another factor to start picking schools that work for you and admit in a process that works for you as the applicant.
I know that there is a lot of, I'll say, anxiety connected to this process, and we are part of this process. But there are going to be things that a student who always likes to be in control, there are going to be things that are outside of your control. The pandemic, not being able to go a place to take a test, hybrid, remote, all these things are outside of your control. So what I'm about to say is going to sound difficult, but control what you can control, whether that is studying, whether that is trying to be involved, whether that is the classes maybe that you want to take. There are things that are within your control that hopefully will not make you miserable as you try and prepare for college. But if you can let go of things that this is outside of my control, I cannot affect this, that I think will help you. At least in talking to some students this year, they have said, knowing that other people are in the same boat as me, or hundreds and hundreds of thousands of other people are in the same boat as you, it's kind of reassuring. I know that's a little bit morbid, but it's a little bit reassuring that there are people with you all along those steps along the way, whether it is your fellow peers, whether it be everyone in Manhattan Beach and Miracosta, whether it's you contact a college, we will all get back to you, right? You contact us, we will get back to you. So if you ever are just trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? You have lots of resources. And when in times of where you don't have control, it can be reassuring to talk to some people that can help you along the way and plan this out.
I'll try and roll about 5 pieces of advice that come to mind. It's the joy, I guess, of going towards the end. One is, as Lisa was saying, go back and watch this. Go back and rewatch it, but also look at our body language. The number of times that when somebody else has been speaking, I've noticed that we've all been nodding along. So it's not just the words, you're getting actual like affirmation that what we're saying from multiple institutions around the country are important. To build on Stephen's point about control, I think the part that often gets forgotten in this entire, and we've literally just spent an hour talking about what you can do in the process. But the part that we forget is that you actually get to decide where you go to college. At the end of the day, you're going to have hopefully a slew of admissions decisions to decide from, and you get to decide where you ultimately want to enroll. And the tables very quickly turn, and you should be asking us lots of questions along the way, just as Stephen said, because you are the ones that are actually in the driver's seat. It's easy to forget that. And I guess sort of along the same lines, this is, I think, more for parents. If this year has taught us nothing, I think it has taught us what's important. And if I were to ask you right now to write down on a piece of paper what you most want for your child in their life, it would probably be health, happiness, financial comfort, somebody who loves them to love somebody as well. The name of where they go to college is not going to be on that list. Certainly not in the top 5, and I would hope not in the top 10 list of things that you want. And you actually set the tone. Whenever surveys are done, and they're done fairly often to students about what most impacts their decision, it's their parents. And if you think about when your children were toddlers, they would walk along and they'd fall down and they would immediately look up to you. And if you swooped in and said, "Oh, poor baby, you must have hurt yourself," they'd promptly burst into tears. But if you looked at them and said, "Nah, nothing's broken," they'd pick themselves up and they'd carry on playing. And honestly, the college search is not that different. That you as their parent can say, "That sucks. That's really that university's loss that they didn't choose to admit you right at this moment in time. But you've got all these other options and it still makes you a wonderful human being." So help keep that perspective, and help keep that perspective for your children.
Well said, Fiona. Well said. Thank you for sharing that. And we, as I mentioned, are recording this, so I know there will be a lot of specific questions that kind of disregard, perhaps in some ways, what's being said, especially in our closing statements here. But I hope, as you mentioned, that people will go back and watch this again and again, because the data that Adam presented, the comments from all of you are just so impactful, I think, for making this a process that can be one that a family can do together that is more positive than negative. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Ruthie and Karen for our Q&A. There are lots of questions in the Q&A, and then I know we received some over Google as well.
Yes. So there are a lot of questions that I think we would like to get through every single one of them, but we just don't have the time for that today. But I think just to take maybe 30 seconds, me and Karen in the CCC, I feel like we're just nodding our heads off, because I mean, everything that our reps are saying about how this process goes, the empowerment that students have to create these lists and hopefully have a slew of admissions come in the spring, and how the tables quickly turn. I mean, that's kind of our guiding star in the CCC with our students, is creating intentional lists and being sure that they have the necessary tools and the proper information. And so I just personally want to thank you, because you're making my position in the CCC, you're really affirming my role and how I speak to students and families. And I think Karen feels the same way.
Definitely. Making our job easier, yes.
Yeah, definitely. One of the questions that I did see a lot in submissions through the Google form, and then also in the Q&A, is about how test scores would impact any merit aid. So I know that Lori covered that a little bit, but I think, I don't know if Stephen or Lisa or Fiona have anything to add about how scores can or will affect any merit financial aid.
So we do have one merit-based scholarship, and it's still test optional. So if you submit a test, great. If you don't submit a test, also great. And then we will continue to go through applications considering people for that scholarship, with or without.
Absolutely. Our process, when we went test optional, we were test optional, so there's no advantage with testing for any of our merit scholarships.
Okay, there are lots of questions about, students are Now, not having the component of the test score, okay, it's kind of putting pressure on everything else that students are doing, right? So there's a lot of questions about, you know, the other things that are being focused on the application, specifically with the pandemic limiting students' involvement and their opportunity to get out as much. How will you be changing that in your process, or what sort of advice do you have for students that are in that situation and worried about my involvement has been limited because of this?
Start by saying literally everyone in the world is in exactly the same boat. Now, I'm going to talk out of the other side of my mouth and say, but they're not. And this gets to the context. Here in LA, you haven't been back in school for a year. You might be back by the end of the year. Some activities are coming back. Whereas, again, I think we're all seeing it, is we're seeing applications from other parts of the state, other parts of the country, other parts of the world where they're back and everything's normal. So we're never, just like with academics, we're never going to compare one student's set of activities to another student in an entirely different part of the world. But we've also seen that students have continued to find ways to be involved. Now, that could be in very traditional ways where you're still being part of the newsletter, the newspaper, the yearbook. I've seen music groups that are still continuing to be involved. Great, if you've been able to, that's fine. I've also seen, especially this year, but even in past years, lots of students who have got leadership positions through taking care of elderly family members, taking care of younger siblings. One of my favorite, this is how I learned leadership essays that I've ever read was from 2 years ago, where a student talked about how she learned leadership skills by teaching her older brother how to microwave pizza because he had special needs. I think, if anything, this past year has allowed students to be a little bit more creative in the ways that they are demonstrating involvement outside of the classroom, however that may be. So I'm not going to say don't worry about it. And to the point of the question too, of like, it's adding more pressure to essays, it's adding more pressure to APs, it's adding more pressure to extracurricular activities. These were all factors that we were looking at before. And Adam really said it very well when he said that there's always been a far greater emphasis on testing by students and by parents than there are actually within the universities. So for the University of California, we have 14 approved criteria that we can use. In the past, now we have 13. It's a pretty negligible shift. I'll try saying that quickly.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions, just to clarify, and this is specifically for the UCs going test blind, and that's all campuses through 2025. I'm making that a statement, and I just want you to confirm that.
Yes, there was a little confusion when the policy was announced roughly a year ago. It was that we would be test optional for 2 years, test blind for 2 years, and then we would figure it out. With everything that occurred, the campuses this year, all of them moved to being test blind. In theory, if we really wanted to, we could be test optional next year. But then the year after, we would have to go back to being test blind. None of us are going to go, I won't speak for every campus, but I'd be shocked if any campus is going to go through the effort of reprogramming how we're reading an application to be optional when we know that the following year we're automatically reverting back to where we are today. So yes, all campuses test blind.
Thank you.
For those campuses that do consider the test scores, do you want to see the writing section?
Can I take this one? I've been
Yes.
tracking this for years, and it's
There's
such a
questions about it.
non-starter. To be clear, the College Board killed off the essay. They no longer offer it because no college cared about it. There's one exception. That is a teachers college, I believe, in Minnesota, that wants the ACT essay still, because then you don't have to take a different placement test when you get there. That's it. Nobody requires the ACT essay. ACT is likely to also follow suit, College Board, and discontinue it. So that's an easy one, folks. That essay is not worth your time on the ACT, no longer offered to you on the SAT. There's other much more meaningful ways of demonstrating your writing ability in your application.
And also to piggyback off of discontinuation of some things, I want to also answer a few questions about the SAT subject test, formerly known as SAT-2. Those have also been discontinued through the College Board. Just wanted to give that piece of information and answer some of those questions. Yeah, I think the other questions are really more about MiraCosta specific, about limiting students to 4 AP classes their junior and senior year. Given that we have such a great school profile, I think I know that our college reps have looked at it, they know it. Stephen Koo was almost right on with numbers with APs and honors at our school. That's a very telling place of the context of our students. And so if the college reps know that we limit our students, which they do know that because of our school profile, then waiting until junior year to take those AP courses is just the policy at MiraCosta. And there's really nothing that can be done about that policy shifting, changing for freshmen and 10th grade or freshmen and sophomore students. And I truly believe that our college admissions reps are looking at that and taking that context for our MiraCosta students. The nodding, just for anyone watching, can't see, just the nodding is really affirming to us. We've gotten a lot of questions about the limit, students not being able to take it till junior year, but I mean, we also really truly believe in the social emotional wellness of our students. And so the maturity level at the junior grade level, it's very different than a freshman. I see it when I meet freshman students and we see them again as juniors. They're different. They know time management better. They know their study skills better. And I think we're doing right by them in doing so.
I just want to add one thing. I know students usually only know their own high school. So just know you are not alone. Okay, there are lots of public schools, lots of private schools. They do the same type of limitations or when you can actually start taking different types of courses too.
Thank you. Other than, the holistic approach to college admissions that we've touched a lot on, we don't have very many other questions on here.
I think you guys have really covered it all. And a lot
yes.
of the comments are saying, thank you. This was refreshing, which again, Ruthie already said we felt that way too. So I don't see any other questions that we haven't really gone over at this point, but if there's anything else you want to leave MiraCosta with, I think you guys have already done that. But if there's any final words of wisdom, again, this has been so refreshing and we're so thankful that you guys took this time to meet with us. It's been fantastic.
Yes.
Can I make a final comment? So much of the questions are about anxiety over control, as Stephen and Fiona talked about, and also this just desire to reverse engineer things and find certainty. And I don't know, because I don't think I know anyone in the audience personally, but I can say confidently for everyone listening, there are far more colleges out there where your son or daughter would have a wonderful experience on all the ways that college is supposed to be formative and wonderful and teeing you up the rest of your life. There's far, far more colleges like that that would happily admit the student and make it affordable for them. Then there are colleges that you think you'd like to attend, but who won't admit you. That's just the numbers. You're worried about lack of certainty and control. Look at the yield numbers that everyone on the college side, almost everyone faces. The popularity process actually works more in your favor if you think broadly enough about it and take to heart some of what they're saying. If you want to put time into test scores, that's readily available. But the trend I see is just to do too much with that to the detriment of other things that are more important in your life and certainly more important in admission decisions. So that's what I would like to leave you with.
I would also say that this is a human process. I mean, all of us on this call have been reading lots and lots and lots and lots of applications over the last few months. We are intentionally inefficient in the way that we review applications. We could load everybody in and in the past have said, oh, these students are below our averages for testing. We're not going to read them. We're just going to go ahead and deny them. Same thing with GPA, but the GPA is literally just a number. It doesn't tell us your trajectory, doesn't tell us the challenges and the opportunities that you faced within your school, doesn't tell us about those limitations, doesn't tell us about who you are as an individual, what you've been doing outside of the classroom, doesn't tell us about your background, and again, what are those challenges and opportunities. So us, we have the dubious distinction of being the most applied to university in the country. We would happily turn some of those applications to somebody else. But what I want you to know is that every single one of them is read in its entirety by 2 human beings. Many are actually read 3, sometimes even 4 times. So if we're able to do that, I know that my colleagues absolutely do the exact same thing. And one of my favorite exercises, it's infuriating as all get out, is when you do like case studies and you give students and families a couple different sort of sample apps and say, who at the end of this would you admit, who would you deny, and who would you waitlist? And inevitably you end up with lots of discussion and lots of debate, and people feel really passionately about this student should be admitted, and somebody else is arguing, no, that student should not be admitted. And then you come to a consensus. And at the end of it, I always say to them, was this a fair process? And universally, everybody comes back and says yes. And then I say, okay, well, if it was your child that was denied, would you say it was a fair process? And almost single-handedly, they come back and say, yeah, no, I would say it's not, that it's a complete crapshoot. So I share that because, as I've said, you will likely face some rejection in this process, but that's okay. That is just as Adam said, if you've done your research, if you've looked broadly, if you've worked with the counseling staff, you will have good choices to be able to decide where ultimately you want to go, what makes sense for you as a family, financially, as well as you individually. So just remember that this is a human process.
And can I throw in a commercial, for lack of a better word, for the resources that you have in front of you, right? We have an event this evening put on by virtue of the foundation. You have a very strong CCC where you have the folks to go to ask these questions, to get these answers, to get you directed in the right way, and to support you through this process. Because it is complex, it is confusing, it is challenging to figure out all the things. So just know that you have the resources and that you should rely on those resources because they're serving you all very well, I can tell.
Well, this has been tremendous. Thank you all for joining us here this evening. We will, as I mentioned, be posting this. In fact, it was live on YouTube, but we are recording it as well, and we'll have it available on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. We also will address any additional questions in the chat that we have answers to that we might not have answered already. And I know that Compass Education Group is also, as we mentioned already, a tremendous resource. And the guidebook that Adam's team puts together is truly phenomenal in terms of data and how colleges are processing applications and how you, if your student chooses to fit into that testing environment, might do so. So truly, Stephen, thank you. I know you're on Eastern time, so thank you for being here with us, for those on the Mountain and Western, and really so appreciative of all of you. And Ruthie and Karen, again, our partners at the CCC, tremendous. So, and Christine, thank you all very much, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.